you are fluent because you can just go back and forth because you've practiced those conversations. But that's the trick of 3 months, becoming fluent in 3 months, becoming fluent in 2 years. What I'm talking about is really being very, very functional, like a well-educated native. That's what I'm talking about. That's what ULMX is all about, being able to express yourself spontaneously. Hi, and welcome back to ULMX, the Universal Language Media Exchange. Today we're talking about how you can learn a language in 2 years. That's something I can say I have done, and you can do it too. There are a few factors that are really important in order to make that possible. The first of which is your motivation. You don't want to be motivated by some frivolous thing. For example, if you saw a movie and you really thought the language was beautiful and you thought that it sounded cool, this kind of a motivation, it might inspire you, but motivation is a lot more than just inspiration. Motivation is really a bunch of small motivations acting in concert. And that's how you really keep consistent practice up over the long term. What do you want out of this language? To tell you why you want to learn your language of choice is not my job here, but I have a few examples of reasons which could be compelling enough, acting in concert, to make it so that you are motivated enough to practice as much as you need to practice in order to become fluent in 2 years. Perhaps you want to go on an adventure. For example, Alexander von Humboldt, a land surveyor and explorer, his native language was German, but he wanted to go to the New World, to South America, to map out the new rivers. Well, they weren't that new, but new to the world. New mountains. He found so many new things. He lived a life of adventure, but in order for him to be able to do that, he first needed to learn Spanish. And if you want to go to another part of the world to dive deep into the culture, the nature, whatever it may be, and language is a tool that you're going to need to be able to do that because they don't speak the same language as you, that kind of a long-term drive could keep you, and probably will keep you, on the path for the 2 years you need to become fluent in that language. Love is another huge motivation that doesn't dwindle over time. If your life partner speaks another language and you want to better understand them, their culture, their mentality, and be able to communicate with them, that is the kind of driver that will keep you going over the long term to do the hard work, the homework, the training, the speaking, making the mistakes, getting back up again, and continuing to be consistent over the 2 years that it will take for you to become fluent in that language. Economic opportunities are always long-term motivators that can shape how people behave over long periods of time. If learning this language is a skill that's going to help you better provide for your family, loved ones, etc., it's the kind of driver that will keep you training more and more over time, as opposed to the New Year's resolution trend of training less and less over time. And the key here really is consistent practice. The more consistently you train, that is where you get your gains from. And motivation is a fickle thing. The more separate motivating factors are acting in concert, the more intrinsic that motivation becomes, and the more you really want to do it despite how you feel at the moment. You want to train you want to get better and improve, and you're willing to do it even when it doesn't feel fun. So now that you have your motivation taken care of, what do you put that motivation to work doing? What training exercises do you use to build up that level of skill in such a short period of time? ULMX is of the opinion that speaking is the #1 best training method. And just like there are different exercises at the gym to work out the same muscle groups, there are different exercises to improve your speaking. In immersion learning, the assumption, sometimes unspoken, is speaking with people, especially native speakers, is the best way to learn. This is just one exercise. And it has a certain utility, but it's a utility more for advanced learners, because speaking in real life is a good way of practicing and using what you already have learned. But in order to learn new things, you need to train on your own. And it's important to mention that speaking with good pronunciation is the real key here. The very first thing that you have to get down is the sound set in that language, which starts with the alphabet. Once you have good pronunciation down, you have good fundamentals, and you can begin speaking sentences. Pronunciation is like your form at the gym or in any sport you can think of. You have to get your form down before you increase the weight and increase that stress on your body. And you need to get the pronunciation down before you start trying to speak in long chains of sounds, which are words and sentences. The very beginning of learning a second language is about learning that pronunciation system, and once you do, practicing reading out loud. The next big thing you have to do is start learning sentences. This is going to be useful for any interactions you have with native speakers in your day-to-day life, as well as giving you the beginnings of syntax and grammar, as well as giving you context to allow you to expand your vocabulary much more quickly than you would with vocabulary lists. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Imagine you had to learn a list of 500 English words, just in a totally random order. You speak English, you don't need to learn the definitions, it's just about learning the order. And of course, in doing so, you learn which 500 words are in the list. If the list were just random, up, for, down, wood, rock, reflection, words that don't make any sense, it's not a sentence. For 500 words, that would be extremely difficult to memorize. It would be like memorizing 500 digits of pi, because there's no real logical order to it. It's just pure memorization. But if you were to be asked to memorize a song that were 500 words long, with the context, with the sentences having actual meanings, with the rhyming, with the logic behind the whole thing, you're going to have an extremely easy time memorizing those same 500 words. And that's exactly what I mean when I say if you learn a sentence as opposed to learning a list of 10 words, you're going to expand the ability to absorb more vocabulary through the power of context. That's the bulk of it. To speak as much as possible, and whatever you can do to practice speaking on your own, so that when you have conversations, you can use what you've learned, but you're not too reliant on that speaking partner to ask them new words and constantly be bogging down the conversation. To be able to practice speaking on your own is actually the utility ULMX wishes to give the world, because there aren't too many tools for that training. So there are lots of different techniques you could use. I made a video about reading out loud that no one seemed to care much about. But of course, reading out loud doesn't sound too exciting. It's extremely powerful, but it doesn't sound too exciting. If you want to speak and practice speaking, try the ULMX app for iOS. And if you don't have iOS, just download the podcast. It's free. You just have to hit pause yourself. So the way that works, and this technique could be done by anyone, as long as they have the desire to create their own learning materials. You just write out a sentence, translate it, get the correct pronunciation, and then you record a little clip of yourself saying the translation in your mother language. Give yourself a second in that audio recording so that when you listen back to it, you'll have a chance to speak yourself, and then repeat the correct answer in the target language. And that's what I did, and it helped me learn German much, much faster than my peers. When I first started in my first A1 class, they were already like, "Are you sure you don't want to go up to maybe A2 or a B1?" And I didn't really know, but I just stuck in the A1 class, and it was extremely slow. The progression in the classroom is nothing compared to the progression that you actually get from putting in the time yourself and doing your own homework and just training alone, just doing it in your head, because your mind is where the language resides in the end anyway. And to internalize it, the best thing you can do is externalize it by using it, speaking it, and expressing it. And when you express yourself in that mother language or in that target language, by expressing it, you're also internalizing it. That's what ULMX is all about, training you to be able to express yourself and improve your verbal abilities, because more than anything, that's where language really is. Everything that we've written for our languages came first from being spoken. And that spoken language got transformed into the written form, and we can use the written form and read it out loud again. But it originates right here in your body, in your mouth, your throat, your lungs, or whatever organs you might count into your speaking organs group. Your vocal cords, your tongue, your cheeks, your lips, your teeth. And that needs to be used a lot. And you have a lot of time. It can be hard sometimes to utilize all the time you have, but in 2 years you have plenty of time to train that part of your body and that part of your mind that controls it all, and somehow miraculously memorizes thousands of sounds and thousands of phrases and sentences, and allows you to express yourself. One of the beauties of the ULMX app, once again, shameless plug, and it is completely shameless, believe me, because I think this is one of the most useful things. Oh dear, clouds are going behind. It's totally shameless plug, because I really feel like this is what everyone needs to do, is to utilize that extra time they have when they're walking to the supermarket or walking to just be healthy. Our app plays in your headphones, and you don't need to be staring at your screen the whole time to learn it. So you're free from a desk, you're free from a screen. It gives you more hours trained because it goes into hours that were otherwise not available because you needed your hands and you couldn't read a book. So now you can clean your dishes and at the same time practice speaking. Ultimately, the answer to how do you learn a language in 2 years, you speak a massive amount, and it is just like working out. You get tired, it really sometimes feels difficult, very difficult. You can really feel the extra effort you're putting in to express yourself in this other language, because it's harder, because you're not as used to it. And all that is training. I deliberately use the word training because it really does tire you out. But yeah, that's it. It's no magic formula. 2 years isn't the shortest amount of time, but different people have different levels of definition of how competent you have to be fluent. And for me, what I'm saying here is you can get to a level where you could go to college and you could attend lectures, you could do group projects with your peers, you could work for sure, depending on your field. You could work at a much lower level than what I'm talking about, which is about a C1 level if you're familiar with the European reference framework for language. And what else are you able to do? Well, you can just talk to anyone at any time about anything, basically. And to be honest, I think you can get to a point where people will be like, oh wow, you're fluent in a lot less than 2 years. People said that to me at a point where I wasn't quite satisfied with how long it took for me to think of how I wanted to express myself in certain ways. And yeah, some people, it depends on the conversation you're having. If you've never had a conversation about this topic, you might not be able to express yourself at all, no matter how long you've been learning the language. But for me, talking about where I came from and why I'm in Germany, and this conversation I've had 20 times, after about, I don't know, maybe a little over a year, people were like, oh wow, you're already pretty much fluent. You're already fluent. And it was like, well, yeah, I've had this conversation with like 20 people at least, probably way more than that, because everyone asks me the same question. So, of course, I've practiced this conversation before, and the sentences are already ingrained in my mind. And, of course, it comes out fluently and fluidly. It's just muscle memory. But then some people will say, how to get fluent in 3 months? Well, that's how you get fluent in 3 months. You practice the same exact stuff over and over again. You practice those same sentences, those same conversations. It's like a dialogue or a script. And yeah, of course, in that scene, in that movie, in that little micro world, you are fluent because you can just go back and forth because you've practiced those conversations. But that's the trick of 3 months, becoming fluent in 3 months. Becoming fluent in 2 years, what I'm talking about is really being very, very functional, like a well-educated native. That's what I'm talking about. That's what ULMX is all about, being able to express yourself spontaneously. That's it. Universal Language Media Exchange, how to get fluent in 2 years. It's a lot of fun, it's a lot of work, but it's a skill that really opens the world to you. It's fulfilling, and like I said, it's fun. Visit us on ulmx.com. Our free podcast is available for people who don't have iOS devices, or if you do have an iOS device but you don't want to download the app because you want to see what it's all about first, check out the podcast on podcasts, Apple Podcasts and Spotify.